Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Nicholas. In this video we will look at another very tragic story. In the quiet and prosperous Federal Heights neighborhood of Salt Lake City, Utah, 14-year-old Elizabeth Smart was sleeping peacefully in her bed on June 5, 2002. She shared a room with her sister Mary Catherine, but their serene sleep was soon disturbed. Late at night, a man with a soft voice, armed with a knife, entered their room by opening the window. Mary Catherine woke up to the noise, but decided to pretend to be asleep to protect her sister. The attacker approached Elizabeth and threatened her if she didn't keep quiet. In fear, Elizabeth obeyed his demands, put on her shoes, and was escorted out of the house. Mary Catherine lay motionless all this time, and it was only 2 hours later that she woke up her parents, Ed and Lois Smart. The parents initially did not believe Mary Catherine's story, thinking that it was just a dream. However, after examining the girls' room and finding a cut window cloth, they realized that their daughter's words were true. Alarmed by Elizabeth's fate, Ed and Lois immediately contacted the police. The police arrived at the Smart family home and questioned Mary Catherine about the man who took Elizabeth away. She described him as a man with dark hair and noticed dark hair on his arms and the backs of his hands. Despite the fact that he spoke softly to Elizabeth, Mary Catherine recognized his voice, which seemed familiar to her, although she could not remember where she had heard it before. About 3.5 hours after Elizabeth's abduction, authorities activated Rachel's alert system to inform the public of her disappearance. The system was named after another Utah girl who was abducted and murdered. Thanks to this system, the authorities were able to quickly reach a large audience and attract public help in finding Elizabeth. Since Ed and Lois Smart put their house up for sale before Elizabeth disappeared, the police considered the people who examined the house as possible suspects in her abduction. In addition, the police checked the Smart family's computer to find out if Elizabeth had made online contacts with strangers, which is a common method in child abduction. By examining the records on her computer, they hoped to identify any contacts that might indicate involvement in the kidnapping. The day after Elizabeth's abduction, her parents turned to national television with a request for her return. In a touching and emotional address, Ed Smart directly addressed the kidnapper, begging him to return his daughter. His voice was full of despair and love. He asked the person responsible for Elizabeth's abduction to show mercy and bring her back safely. Tears accompanied his plea as he spoke of his boundless love for his daughter and his unwavering determination to find her. When police interviewed the Smart family's neighbors in Federal Heights, none of them reported any suspicious sounds or visions on the day Elizabeth was abducted. This surprised the police, as they hoped to gather more information for the investigation. With no leads in Elizabeth's disappearance, the police began to feel frustrated by the lack of progress in her case. The police captain said that there were still suspects in Elizabeth's abduction, but stressed that the girl's family was not at the center of the investigation. One of the 1,200 volunteers searching for Elizabeth informed police about a suspicious man she saw while exploring a wooded canyon. The volunteer described a man who was acting suspiciously in the area. This information prompted the police to start searching for the man. The search continued all night, but despite efforts, the police failed to find a suspicious person. As a result, they dismissed this clue, deciding that it was unreliable. Another tip received by the police regarding Elizabeth's abduction came from a local milkman from Federal Heights. The milkman claimed to have seen a man driving an old gray Honda or Nissan on Elizabeth Street a day or two before she disappeared. He told police that he had a strange feeling about the driver of the car and decided to write down the license plate. When the police carefully checked their vehicle database for this particular license plate, they found nothing. Having found no relevant information or clues, they dismissed this clue as unsuitable. The police investigating the kidnapping of Elizabeth Smart faced a serious problem due to the large number of people who came to Smart's house in the hours after her abduction. By the time police arrived at the scene at about 4 a.m., the house was already filled with a lot of people, which could potentially contaminate any possible evidence. During the ongoing search for Elizabeth Smart, police questioned a man who had contact with Elizabeth at a public event prior to her abduction. However, the man was soon released, having determined that he had no connection with Elizabeth's disappearance. Search efforts intensified, and more than 20 volunteer pilots on their private planes searched for the girl from the air over Salt Lake. However, their efforts have not yielded results. The tracking dogs indicated that they sensed something in Red Butte Canyon, a few miles from Elizabeth's home. The police searched the area, but it turned out to be a dead end. Despair gripped Elizabeth's father, Ed Smart, while searching for his daughter. He collapsed from exhaustion and was taken to the hospital. However, he was discharged a few hours later and decided to continue the search. Ed Smart and his wife could not sleep and were extremely exhausted by everything that was happening. In an interview with the media, Ed Smart expressed his disappointment and determination to find his daughter, saying that he and his wife are barely holding on. Despite the exhaustion of Elizabeth's parents during the search, Ed and Lois Smart still hoped that their daughter was alive. Elizabeth's family was firmly convinced that she would return home. This confidence was deeply rooted in their hearts. Elizabeth's mother, Lois Smart, expressed her love and commitment to her daughter through the media. In a powerful and emotional statement, she said, "Elizabeth, if you can hear us, we love you." Elizabeth's loved ones held a candlelit prayer vigil, praying for her safe return home. In response to the kidnapping, the police asked Elizabeth's father, Ed, to take a polygraph test. Ed readily agreed, showing the family's willingness to help the authorities find their daughter. The family was ready to do whatever was necessary to help with the investigation. The investigation into Elizabeth's abduction ruled out the possibility that she had faked her disappearance and determined that she had not escaped. Mark Kloss, whose daughter was abducted and murdered in California in October 1993, contacted Elizabeth's family to offer his support. He came to Utah to meet with Ed and Lois Smart, sharing his experiences and offering his advice to help them cope with difficulties. In an interview with the media, Mark Kloss noted how the internet helped in the investigation of Elizabeth's disappearance. He said that thanks to the internet, the police were able to quickly and effectively spread information about the missing Elizabeth, which allowed them to reach a wider audience and notify people in different states, increasing the chances of finding her. Soon, the police turned their attention to 48-year-old Richard Albert Ritchie. Elizabeth's father, Ed Smart, told police that he hired Richard to work at his house for 2 months last year. According to Ed, since Richard didn't have a car, they agreed that Ed would give Richard his 1990 Jeep Cherokee in exchange for his labor. However, Ed Smart did not know that Richard Ritchie was a career criminal and later stated that he would not have hired Richard if he had known about his past. Richard Ritchie's criminal history began in 1973 when he was convicted of second-degree burglary. This robbery was the beginning of a series of crimes that continued for several decades. In 1981, Richard Ritchie was again convicted of burglary, and in 1983 for aggravated robbery and attempted murder. During a pharmacy robbery, he wounded a policeman in a shootout. In addition, in 1996, Ritchie was convicted of stealing about $2,500 worth of groceries from a Food Locker. According to the criminal registry, Ritchie was released on parole in September 2000. In an interview with the media, Ed Smart expressed doubts about Richard Ritchie's involvement in the kidnapping of his daughter, despite his criminal past. On June 14, 2002, Ritchie was arrested for violating parole conditions, and police were unable to confirm his whereabouts on the day Elizabeth was abducted. However, Ritchie denied any involvement in the kidnapping. Through his lawyer, he said that the police had conducted a thorough search of his house, but had not found any evidence related to the abduction. Ritchie claimed to have fully cooperated with the police, providing blood samples for DNA analysis and undergoing 26 hours of interrogation. He also handed over his car for investigation. By July 2002, Elizabeth Smart had been missing for a month, and her family was desperately waiting for her return. Hopes were revived when police received a report about a girl who looked like Elizabeth, seen in Nebraska in suspicious circumstances. A witness at the gas station claimed to have seen a crying girl who seemed to be being held in a minivan against her will. The description of the girl matched Elizabeth's appearance. However, a police investigation revealed that this message had nothing to do with Elizabeth's abduction. After a thorough search, the police did not find enough evidence to link this surveillance to Elizabeth's case. This disappointment caused the Smart family to experience mixed feelings, continuing to hope for Elizabeth's safe return, but recognizing the possibility of false leads. Despite the setback, the Smart family remained steadfast in their quest to find Elizabeth. They remained cautiously optimistic, stating that although they did not rule out the possibility that the girl at the gas station could be Elizabeth, they had to keep an open mind. A family representative expressed, "We don't necessarily hope it's Elizabeth. If it's her, we'll be thrilled." Over time, when Elizabeth Smart remained missing, the police investigating the abduction turned to unusual methods in an attempt to find her. Among these methods was the use of psychics who claimed that they could use extrasensory perception to get information about the whereabouts of the missing girl. Psychics provided information to investigators, suggesting that Elizabeth could be found in a crypt on the slopes above Salt Lake City. This information prompted members of the Seattle-based company to report that more than a dozen of their members had found Elizabeth's body through a special psychic process called technical remote viewing. However, upon arriving at the specified place, the police did not find any traces of Elizabeth's disappearance. In November 2002, Walter Kenneth Holloway was arrested, accused of extortion. Walter Holloway contacted the Smart family and Salt Lake City police, claiming that he had kidnapped their daughter, Elizabeth. He demanded $3 million from Ed and Lois Smart for the safe return of their daughter and threatened to harm Elizabeth if he did not receive the money. However, the police managed to track down Holloway in South Carolina and determined that he was not involved in the kidnapping. Ed Smart later stated that he was outraged by the extortion scheme and felt angry because it diverted police attention from the search for his daughter. The false accusations of kidnapping made it difficult to find Elizabeth Smart and diverted resources that could have been used more effectively. On a quiet autumn day in 2002, when leaves covered the ground with a golden carpet, the Smart family experienced a moment of epiphany, which later became a key turn in their unhappy story. Mary Catherine, Elizabeth's younger sister, had a sudden epiphany. The voice she heard on that fateful night when her sister was abducted belonged to a man they knew by the name of Emmanuel. This man, an unemployed and lonely wanderer, was hired by the family for just one day to do odd jobs around the house, including repairing the roof and collecting fallen leaves. Despite his brief presence in their lives, his voice was forever etched into Mary Catherine's memory. The police, however, reacted to this discovery with disbelief. Doubts arose due to the fact that it took a long time from the moment of the abduction to the moment when Mary Catherine recognized the voice, and because she heard the voice of the kidnapper for only a few moments. Nevertheless, the family's persistence led to the creation of an Emmanuel sketch, which was featured in the news and on popular TV shows such as Larry King Live and America's Most Wanted in February 2003. This sketch helped identify Brian David Mitchell, the man who soon became the main suspect in Elizabeth's abduction. On March 12, 2003, in the small town of Sandy, Utah, two couples, enjoying a spring day, witnessed something unusual. They recognized Mitchell, who was in the company of a woman and a girl, and their suspicions led them to immediately call the police. Arriving police officers quickly identified the missing Elizabeth Smart and arrested Mitchell along with his wife, Wanda Barzee. It was the moment when the long months of anxiety and fear for the Smart family finally turned into relief. After her rescue, Elizabeth shared the horrifying details of her abduction and captivity. She was taken to a secluded camp hidden among dense thickets outside the city, where she met Wanda Barzee. At the beginning of her captivity, Wanda seemed like a mother figure to her, offering comfort and warmth on cold nights. However, over time, Wanda began to reveal her true nature, turning into a despotic tyrant who forced Elizabeth to follow their perverted devilish rituals and teachings. The most traumatic experience for Elizabeth was being forced into a marriage with Mitchell, who declared that he was a king and Elizabeth would become the first of many virgins he intended to kidnap. This marriage was just one of the many ways Mitchell and Barzee tried to break Elizabeth's spirit and bend her to their will. During her captivity, Elizabeth was chained to a tree with a metal cable, which limited her freedom and left her in a state of constant fear and despair. Her days were filled with psychological torture and humiliation, which left an indelible mark on her memory. This story of Elizabeth Smart's abduction and rescue has become a symbol of both human cruelty and the indomitable fortitude that allowed her to survive and eventually return to her family. In the depths of her captivity, Elizabeth Smart faced the need to give up her name, a symbol of her identity and connection with her family. She chose the name Esther. This new name became for Elizabeth a symbol of the new life imposed on her by Brian David Mitchell and Wanda Barzee, and the loss of control over her own destiny. The dark days of captivity were marred by repeated acts of violence that Elizabeth had to endure. These attacks, which occurred several times a day, left her in a state of deep trauma and constant fear. Mitchell compounded her suffering by forcing her to view obscene publications, which further deepened her trauma and sense of humiliation. Threats of violence and death were constant, and Mitchell regularly threatened to kill her, keeping Elizabeth in a state of constant fear and anxiety. To suppress her will to resist, Mitchell often forced Elizabeth to use alcohol and drugs, which made her more vulnerable and malleable to his manipulations. She also suffered from hunger, forced to eat waste, which was another way of humiliation and control. After her release, Elizabeth called Wanda Barzee the most evil woman she had ever had to deal with, highlighting the depth of the evil she had experienced at the hands of her captor. As a result of years of litigation, Wanda Barzee pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. However, despite Elizabeth's protests and public outrage, Barzee was released in 2018. Elizabeth, who had by then become a child safety activist, expressed fears that Barzee was still a threat to society, pointing to Barzee's lack of remorse and signs of rehabilitation. After a long and grueling legal battle, Brian David Mitchell was sentenced to life in prison for the kidnapping of Elizabeth Smart. At the sentencing hearing, Elizabeth was able to express all the pain and trauma he had caused her. She steadfastly stated that despite the darkness he had brought into her life, she intended to lead a good life and would not let this experience determine her future. Elizabeth's words reflected her indomitable strength and determination to overcome the challenges she faced and move forward with hope and purpose. What are your thoughts on this story? Please express your views, leave comments, subscribe, and like. We thank you for watching. Remember to take care of your own well-being and the well-being of your loved ones.